So the next bit. And here I ask you to add a few bits and pieces. I think they're in red. They're marked in red on the in the tutorial. But here I've added a series of lists in message boxes, in addition to an unpack object. And this unpack object is, as I discussed the unpack object in exercises 1b, and this one you have a number of arguments, each one representing one of your outlets, and so there should be eight arguments for 8 outlets, and those will unpack the 8 items in the list from each of these message boxes. And they, in turn, once they've been routed through unpack, they will update these these message boxes with numbers in them, which means that the select object will trigger the new message boxes. So I've got to come on then. I've got a dog on my knee. Yes, sit down. Yeah, well, you'll see what's happening anyway. So if I make sure it's routing through the counter, which is where I want it to go. Okay, well, it's routing through. It's running through these messages. Messages in the number box. Sorry, these numbers in the message boxes at the moment. If I click on this top list, we get a repeating sequence, which I can change by clicking another list. Again, all the numbers go through into the unpack object. They update these messages, and then those are the ones that are triggered by the select object running through the numbers. Okay, and then I can you will notice that this is You'll notice that this is the first few bars of a Bach Prelude, except that every time I want it to change sequences, so each one of these essentially represents a bar, although in fact it's actually half a bar, I think, in the score of the Bach Prelude. And you notice that I have to click a new one each time I want that sequence to change, but I also have to do it at the right time. And if I get it wrong, then you heard that the sequence kind of changed preemptively and didn't sound quite like the original piece. So we could get Max to do all of this stuff for us, and that would not only mean a great deal less effort for me in terms of having to click all these message boxes all the time, but also it will be much more reliable, and I can make it change at exactly the time that I want it to change. So how do I do that? Well, we'll move to the next version where it's basically exactly the same thing. I've just condensed it, which in fact is no good at all. Oh, and I've also gotten rid of the random thing because we don't really need that at the moment. So I'm going to move this up a bit so we've got a bit more room. And basically, with this exercise, I'm really demonstrating. Oh, that's annoying. Try again. I'm trying to demonstrate that this idea of using counter and select to determine a sequence of events can work at a variety of musical levels, if you like, or structural levels. So in this case, as I say, this is determining beats. So the counter counts in beats. But what we could do is we could get it to recognise bars. We could get it to count bars, and if we can count bars, then on the basis of what bar we're on, we can tell it to change to the appropriate sequence. So as I say, at the moment, counter is producing the beats, and then select is choosing which of the notes to, or which of these numbers which will be interpreted by note out as notes are going to be selected at any particular time. But how would we recognise the changing bars? Well, we know that there's only one beat 1 in each bar, okay, and that happens at the beginning of the bar. So we could select beat 1, and every time we select beat 1 we know that that is a new bar. So that's basically what this thing does over here, select 1. So the first beat of the bar will always be selected, and we can count the number of first beats of the bar, i.e. the number of bars, using a counter object over here. And then we can use the count. We can use that count to determine what should happen at certain points. So I don't know how well I've explained that. I don't know whether it's particularly clear, but I'm going to connect that our counter object to the select, and then, as I say, every beat 1 is going to be registered by this select object, which only has one argument, so it only has one thing to recognise, and then that will send a bang every time it receives a beat 1, and each of those will in turn be counted. So this counter object is measuring the number of bars, as I said, and then on the basis of each bar we can say, okay, well, when it recognises the first bar, I will get it to trigger this first sequence of notes. Well, that first sequence of notes is in the prelude repeated, so I send the second one of those to that same message box. Then if we like bar 3, we have a different sequence that we want to select, which again is repeated. And then in bar 5 we want a third sequence to be selected, and that to be repeated. And then we go back to the original sequence for 2 bars. And then we carry on with repeating the sequences for the next series of notes. So connect all of those up. La la la. There we go. Right, so well, we should hopefully see what happens. You'll see that whenever this reaches number 1, you'll get a flash here. It will have recognised the bar, if you like, and then the counter object will count up to number 1, and then number 2 for the second bar, 3 for the third bar, and so on. And then that in turn will select each of these number boxes in turn, or message boxes in turn. So we'll try that. But I need to lock the patch first. But hopefully it's clear that on that basis we've managed to determine a more the structure of the piece, or the changing structure of the piece, not just the beats that happen. Yeah, and of course on that basis you could then structure a much larger piece, because you could measure the number of beats, you could also measure the number of bars, which is what this is doing, or you could measure the number of of sections, if you like. You could get it to determine certain sections. So just by using these very simple counter and select, you can determine much larger levels of structure. I hope that's reasonably clear, and in a minute we'll move on to more of exercises 2A.